Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindie Chavez here. Today is Tuesday, August the 28th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Yours first daily dose of happy for the day. We hope you're off to a happy start today. I know I am, because we have a fun topic we're talking about today, Cindie. I am a Potter fan. I have been a Potter fan not since the books came out for the first time, but since about the time that the first movie came out. And it was interesting because when I first got a hold of my first copy of the first book and read it, my first reaction was, this is good. This is way beyond children's literature. This is good stuff.
Yeah, agree.
I mean, it was really something. I mean, obviously it is children's literature, and the way that she writes it is perfect for kids. I mean, you can just tell she really aligns with the way kids think. But nevertheless, it's good literature for anybody. It's just fun, a good fun read. I was enthralled from the beginning to the end, every single book.
I have not read them all, and now I'm thinking that I want to. I read the first book and saw the first movie, and I'm not sure in which order. But I thought the movie was really, really well done.
Oh, yeah.
And usually I'm the person that wants to read the book instead of the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, and if I've read the book and the movie's going to be made many times, I'm, especially if the book was just really good, I think, yeah, they're not going to be able to make. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But I thought the Harry Potter movies were fantastic. And, of course, she was the screenwriter. I think that makes a big difference.
I mean, she actually did have a screenwriter, but she was certainly the writer who inspired the screenwriting. That's for sure.
She produced them, yes?
Nope. The screenwriter was a guy named Stephen Clovis. The producer's name, I can't remember what his name is.
Okay, because in many places I saw her listed as a screenwriter and a movie producer, so I just figured they were speaking of the Harry Potter movie.
Well, I'm sure she played both kinds of roles, but she didn't play the lead role in either case. I mean,
I think her involvement definitely showed up.
It was very big involvements, and Stephen Clovis, who was the screenwriter, will be the first person to tell you that, because literally every step of the way. Of course, she knew exactly how all the books were going to come out, and he didn't.
That's true. So things that happen in an earlier movie may have been written in a certain way because she had the knowledge of what she was doing further down the road.
In fact, I remember seeing an interview with Clovis one time in which he said he had, I think it was they were working on like the third movie or something like that, and he had a copy of the manuscript, and he was going through it, preparing to write the screenplay, and as he was sitting on a plane, and it suddenly occurred to him he was the only person in the world who knew what was in this book.
Oh my goodness. Top secret information.
Yeah, top secret. Oh, yeah, and it was, too, from her perspective. She wanted all the secrecy kept. Yeah.
Well, I totally get that. I mean, we can joke about it. Oh, top secret. But if it was something I wrote and I only handed it to one person that was not supposed to, I would be really concerned that they were keeping it secret, too.
Well, he was concerned, like, oh, my God, I got to protect this thing. What if I lose it? What happens? Oh, my God.
Seriously.
But we're doing this this show on Joe Rowling because this is going to be the first of a series Cindie and I are doing on wealthy people. I mean, coming out of the shows that we did last week about billionaires and millionaires and bajillionaires and all the other heirs, because we realize that it's really important to all of us who want to have a healthy relationship with money to make sure we remove resistances. And one of the big resistances a lot of people have is resistance to the fact that we don't always like billionaires. We don't always like millionaires. They aren't always likable. And in fact, the ones we hear about the most aren't terribly likable. But the fact is that there's a vast majority of them we never hear about who are likable and who are really very good people. And some of them are actually famous and very good people. And I think Joe Rowling is one of them.
Yeah. And famous not just because they have money, although that may be a big part of it, but famous for their work, and also famous for what they do with their money. Like, it's funny, I never realized this before. I should have, because pretty much anything that you want to find online or even in a big library, there's a section of information for every topic you can think of, but there are whole websites devoted to philanthropy,
Yes.
and keeping track.
Keeping
I
track.
don't know how much I like that, but keeping track of all the things that people are doing with their money in the area of philanthropy. And so I think it's a nice thing, just the idea of being very conscious about changing our money story and finding ways or finding out information that changes our money story. And
Mm-hmm.
part of it is our viewpoint of, our perspective, how we view money and people with money and what people do with money, etc. I think it's a really important thing that we're doing,
Oh yeah.
especially if there's a lot of bad stories out there, a lot of old money stories that could do for some changing. So I think
Right. A little updating. Yeah.
yeah, and when we went through the book Money and the Law of Attraction, and we talked about our own personal money story, or the idea of a person having their own story.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So much of it sort of coincided with that same formula that most of our old stories have, right? It's just like critical of ourselves, and, talking about how we haven't been successful, just like the old job story. It was like, oh, I've been in a job that I hate, and,
Yep.
no one
Mm-hmm.
appreciates me, and on and on. They all have that same energy, the kind of victim energy and conflict energy. And so I think that this expands the money story and recognizes that our story we have about ourselves and our successes and failures and all of that, it's connected to a bigger story. No matter what area we're talking about, it's always connected to our worldview and our own personal ideology and what we see out there. And so to change our own personal story, I think it helps. I think it's supportive to change that broader story too.
Oh, I think so. And in fact, one of the things that I was discovering, not discovering because I already knew this, I think, but noticing as I did my minimal amount of research preparing for the show, and I did find some good stuff, which was good. But I was noticing that if we look deeply enough, we find that very wealthy people are people. They're just people like everybody else.
Yep.
They're not different. They have the same kinds of foibles. They have the same kinds of dreams and aspirations. They have the same kinds of everything. It's just they also have the money to go with it. And when you understand that, and when you come to know somebody in some way, like through a biography or whatever, suddenly all of the preconceptions kind of melt away because
I love that
they're
you
just
said
human.
that. They're not different.
They're not different.
Because that's, even though in some ways people are all different, right? We're also much, much more the same than we ever are different.
True. Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I think that that's so important. It's the same thing that's important about the way we look at people that have different beliefs, the way we look at people that have a different color of skin, the way we look at people of a different sex or gender,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like there's so much more the same. We have so much more in common than we do that's contrary to one another. And so I love the idea that, yes, it sounds so simple. They're just people. They're just people just like us. But it's so true, and it's so powerful when we really get that, instead of grouping this whole group of people together, because it's really shallow
It is.
to group a whole group of people together, however we group them,
Exactly.
and then make, stereotypical remarks or thoughts about them and just put them all over there. They're different than me. They're all over there, instead of recognizing that we all have a common humanity.
My favorite way of looking at grouping is a joke. The joke says there are two kinds of people in the world: those who group the world into two kinds of people and those who do not.
So true. That's so true. It's so funny.
And the
Well,
simple
I
fact
love
is we are individuals. It's not like we're not all different. We are all different. That's
right.
individuality is wonderful. That's what makes it all so interesting. That's where the contrast comes from. That's where all of the really juicy part of living comes from. But I think the real point here isn't that we're different or even that we're the same. It's that one group of us isn't better than the other because they've got money.
Yeah, right. I love this quote. It wasn't a quote about money. It was a quote about the difference between confidence and arrogance.
Good
But
difference to
what it
know
said
too.
is that confidence may be that you know you can do this thing better than anyone in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Arrogance is when you think it makes you better than them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, that's it, right? And so it's just knowing that you're right. We're all different. We all have a different experience. But there's so many points of connection where we will be the same or we will have the same experience is a better way to put it.
I would
And
even take that distinction a little bit in a different direction. I mean, what you said was fine, but I would take it in a slightly different direction. I would say that a confident person is someone who not only is good at what they do, but they don't really care whether or not they're comparing to anybody else. Whereas the arrogant person desperately wants to compare to somebody else because how they're building their self esteem.
well, I always think that confidence isn't about knowing that you can, you know, do it right. Confidence is not caring whether you make a mistake.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's a big part of it. Because it's not like
And
confident people don't make mistakes. I mean, how often do confident people make mistakes? Well, daily.
yeah, same as everyone else.
Exactly.
The more you do anything, the more mistakes are going to happen. I always think about people that, you're not riding your bike all that much if you've never fallen off, right?
Okay, well, that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the quotes that in my even briefer research than your research, uh, one of the quotes that I read from J.K. Rowling that I thought was interesting was that she was talking about failure, and we're talking about that right now. She said that she said, I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and I began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena I believed I truly belonged.
That's really good.
And so she starts that. I didn't read the very beginning of the quote, but it says failure meant stripping away of the inessential. And I think she wasn't talking about things because at that point where she was writing, she was living on welfare and as a single mother. And I don't think she had a lot of support because her marriage had failed. Her mother had died, which was apparently crushing to her.
Mm-hmm.
So, I love this sentence where she says, I began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me.
Yeah.
And we talk on our podcast a lot about focus and really learning how to hone in our focus. And to me, that's such a great picture of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, that took a lot of focus to reach that point in her life where she was determined to do just at least this one thing, that she felt she was good at. That's
to
really
direct
high level
all
focus.
your energy.
Direct all of the energy. Yeah, yeah. The thing that really strikes you when you look into Jo Rowling is how she really is about as far from the stereotype of a wealthy person as you can think of, because she's definitely not full of herself. I mean, quite the opposite. She's quite self-effacing in many ways. I mean, one of the biographical pieces I found online that I think she wrote is The Not Especially Fascinating Life So Far of J.K. Rowling. What a great title,
I love that
title. And it really just strips away any kind of pretense or whatever when you read the thing. I mean, maybe we should just read it because it's really very good.
I read somewhere that she went from being in, I don't know what to call it, poverty, lack, to being a multimillionaire in the space of 5 years. And I know that one of the things that people sometimes worry about and causes them to hold money away from themselves is they think it will change them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that happened at all. I think money is a magnifier. I think it just gives us the capacity to do more of whatever it is we do. Right? So if we're already stingy and greedy, then we'll just have the capacity to hoard more money. But if we're generous and creative and giving, then we'll have the capacity to give more, and to be even more generous, and to be even more creative, because we have, the ability to buy more of whatever it is we need to create what we're creating. So that to have that kind of money suddenly in the space of 5 years, that's a pretty short amount of time.
It is. Yeah. I mean, she's a true modern rags to riches story. That used to be a common kind of story that was sold in books and in what they call in Britain penny dreadfuls and low cost literature of the late 19th and early 20th century. It was a very, very common theme, and it's one that kind of fell to the wayside. I mean, I can't remember any stories like that were told when I was growing up, but now we have another one. And it's one that almost anybody can identify with to some degree because of her humanity. She's such a human person.
When did you say those type of stories were really, really popular?
They were really popular in the late 19th century, so the late 1800s.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which, by the way, was a time here in the United States anyway of really tremendous financial progress and economic success, not just for a few wealthy people that we hear about, but wide swaths of human beings made fortunes for themselves, or had good careers, or just had very successful lives economically. So it was the idea of rags to riches was quite common. It was not an unusual thing at all during that time.
Because it happened, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. And it sounds to me like those kind of stories, I mean, and the ones that I know of, and even J.K. Rowling's story, I think those kind of stories bring hope to people when they are in a position where they don't have money.
Oh, yeah. That's why they're written.
Right.
That was the original motivation behind a rags to riches story, was to help other people enjoy and experience to some degree what it's like to live like that.
Yeah. I was looking for a quote that I read from her, and I can't find it right now. I should have marked it. I read it last week, but it was her saying that about the idea that people say money is not the most important thing. Mm-hmm. She said the only person that would say that was someone that has always had money, because to someone that doesn't have money, it is absolutely the most important thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought, oh, wow, that's good.
Well, she's experienced both extremes. And I don't mean just being poorer off and being well off. I mean, like, being absolutely dirt poor, trying to figure out where the next meals come from, and being one of the wealthiest people in the world. She's been both of those. That's pretty big extremes right there.
Right. So I think she can make that statement with authority.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So, you know what I would love to do? I would love to tell anyone listening live how they could call in and join us in the conversation.
Oh, good idea.
Because there are many, many, many Harry Potter fans and J.K. Rowling fans, and people that listen to us because they love Law of Attraction, and people who also want to figure out how to tell a better money story. So I would just love to open that up and say, let's talk.
Yeah, we can do that. Why not? And in fact, even if people are listening to this as a recorded podcast, for future shows, if you want to call in, here's how you do it. It's pretty simple. Just go to the homepage of our website at loatoday.net. The instructions are right there, and there's a number of ways you can do it. You can do it by phone, or you can do it by downloading some software for the Zoom platform that Cindie and I use when we're doing the podcast each time. But if you do it by phone, and if you're just listening live right now and you want to just write down the number, here's the number. In the United States, you call area code 646-876-9923. That's 646-876-9923. And then there's an access code, and the access code also sounds like a phone number, but it's not. It's 860-264-5432. And that access code again is 860-264-5432.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, while you're there at the website, if you have not subscribed yet, we would love it for you to subscribe to the podcast. That way you get it coming to you and you don't miss any episodes.
That's right. Yeah. And it's really simple to do. It takes about a minute. And you can do it with either an iPhone or an Android phone or even with a tablet, whatever device you like to use. But it's really easy. You just have your podcast software. You install some if you don't have a podcast app. If you have an iPhone or an iPad, you have a podcast app built in that you can use. And then just open up the app once you've got it installed, and they all have a little search thing in it. You just do a search for LOA Today, and boom, there we are. You just subscribe. Real simple.
Yay!
Oh, and if you're an existing subscriber and you're enjoying the show, post something somewhere on Facebook or on Twitter or Instagram or something saying that you're listening to LOAtoday.net, because we're finding that more and more people, as they do that, they're helping to boost our numbers. We've seen that over the last couple of 3 weeks, that the numbers of people who find out about LOA Today and get their daily dose of happy is increasing. So, keep posting those notes out there because they're making a difference.
Thank you. Awesome. So I'm looking at this little not especially fascinating life so far.
Yeah.
Of J.K. Rowling. And it's interesting, the dates on it. I'm trying to figure out when it was written, because the article in the date in the tag in the URL for the article says 1998.
Right.
And then the date on the writing says 2/16/07.
Right.
Any idea?
I suspect, the story and the photo sound and look to me like 1998 rather than 2007. I suspect that there was some sort of update in February 2007, and that's why that date's up there. But I suspect this actually comes from 1998.
Or they actually put 1998 in the URL because that's when this was written, and then they
Something
published
like
it in
right.
07. When did the first Harry Potter book come out?
Oh, good question. When was the first book published? Actually, I think I can tell you. Hang on a moment. She finished her manuscript in 95, and it was published in June 1997 with an initial print run of 1,000 copies. 500 of which were distributed to libraries.
The publisher said, okay, we'll give it a little test.
We'll give it a little bit, yeah.
Well, so this is interesting because then she would have written this before the big success, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
actually,
this is probably as the big success was happening. Because if this was written in 1998, Potter had been out for a year. It had already exploded in terms of number of kids reading it. So she probably felt like, well, maybe some of the kids who read want to find out who the writer is. So I'll write. Yeah, I'm looking
because she mentions it in the middle of it. Would you like to read it?
Sure.
I think it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to read it, or shall I?
I don't care.
Okay. Well, I'll get started then. I'll tell you what. We'll split it.
All right.
So it's entitled "The Not Especially Fascinating Life So Far of J.K. Rowling." I was born in Chipping Sawbury General Hospital, which I think is appropriate for someone who collects funny names. My sister, Di, was born just under 2 years later, and she was the person who suffered my first efforts at storytelling. I was much bigger than her and could hold her down. Rabbits loomed large in our early storytelling sessions. We badly wanted a rabbit. Di can still remember me telling her a story in which she fell down a rabbit hole and was fed strawberries by the rabbit family inside it. Certainly, the first story I ever wrote down when I was 5 or 6 was about a rabbit called Rabbit. Such a creative name. I got the measles and was visited by his friends, including a giant bee called Miss B. And ever since Rabbit and Miss B, I have wanted to be a writer, though I rarely told anyone so. I was afraid they'd tell me I didn't have a hope. They probably would have, too. We moved house twice when I was growing up. The first move was from Yate, just outside Bristol, to Winterbourne on the other side of Bristol. A gang of children, including myself and my sister, used to play together up and down our street in Winterbourne. 2 of the gang members were a brother and sister whose surname was Potter. I always liked the name, But then I was always keener on my friends' surnames than my own. Rowling is pronounced like rolling, which used to lead to annoying children's jokes about rolling pins. When I was 9, we moved to Tuts Hill near Chepstow in the Forest of Dean. We were finally out in the countryside, which had always been my parents' dream, both being Londoners, and my sister and I spent most of our times wandering unsupervised across fields and along the River Wye, W-Y-E. The only fly in the ointment was the fact that I hated my new school. It was a very small, very old-fashioned place where the roll-top desks still had inkwells. My new teacher, Mrs. Morgan, scared the life out of me. She gave me an arithmetic test on the very first morning, and after a huge effort, I managed to get 0 out of 10. I had never done fractions before. So she sat me in the row of desks on her far right. It took me a few days to realize I was in the stupid role. Mrs. Morgan positioned everyone in the class according to how clever she thought they were. The brightest sat on her left, and everyone she thought was dim sat on the right. I was as far right as you could get without sitting in the playground.
Aww.
It's so sad, but it's funny, too. I mean, Mrs. Morgan was a seriously disturbed person. By the end of the year, I had been promoted to second left, but at a cost. Mrs. Morgan made me swap seats with my best friend so that in one short walk across the room, I became clever but unpopular.
Oh my goodness.
She shows here how great a writer she is because she's so down to earth. She's just sharing, her most intimate thoughts, stuff that anybody can identify with because we've all been through junk like that. I mean, you feel like you know her after 4 paragraphs.
Right?
So why don't you pick up from here?
From Tuts Hill Primary, I went to Whiting Comprehensive. I heard the same rumor about Whiting that Harry hears from Dudley about Stonewall High. See page of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. There's no number there. But it wasn't true. At least it never happened to me. I was quiet, freckly, short-sighted, and rubbish at sports. I am the only person I know who managed to break their arm playing netball. My favorite subject by far was English, but I quite liked languages too. I used to tell my equally quiet and studious friends long serial stories at lunchtimes. They usually involved us all doing heroic and daring deeds we certainly wouldn't have done in real life. We were all too swotty. I did once have a fight with the toughest girl in my year, but I didn't have a choice. She started hitting me, and it was hit back or lie down and play dead. For a few days, I was quite famous because she hadn't managed to flatten me. The truth was that my locker was right behind me and held me up. I spent weeks afterwards peering nervously around corners in case she was waiting to ambush me.
Yeah.
I became less quiet as I got older. For one thing, I started wearing contact lenses, which made me less scared of being hit in the face. I wrote a lot in my teens, but I never showed any of it to my friends, except for funny stories that again featured us all in thinly disguised characters. I was made head girl in my final year, and I can only think of 2 things I had to do. One was to show Lady Somebody around the school fair, and the other was give an assembly to the whole school. I decided to play them a record to cut down on the time I had to speak to them. The record was scratched and played the same line of song over and over again until the deputy headmistress kicked it.
Such a good writer. I mean, you could just, it evokes for you the scene. You can just see the scene where this is playing, right?
I went to Exeter University straight after school where I studied French. This was a big mistake. I had listened too hard to my parents, who thought languages would lead to a great career as a bilingual secretary. Unfortunately, I am one of the most disorganized people in the world, and, as I later proved, the worst secretary ever. All I ever liked about working in offices was being able to type up stories on the computer when no one was looking.
Uh-huh.
I was never paying much attention in meetings because I was usually scribbling bits of my latest stories in the margins of the pad, or choosing excellent names for the characters. This is a problem when you are supposed to be taking the minutes of the meeting. When I was
it does create an interesting set of minutes when you're done, though.
When I was 26, I gave up on offices completely and went abroad to teach English as a foreign language. My students used to make jokes about my name. It was like being back in Winterbourne, except that the Portuguese children said rolling stone instead of rolling pin. I loved teaching English, and as I worked afternoons and evenings, I had mornings free for writing. This was particularly good news as I had now started my third novel. The first two had been abandoned when I realized how very bad they were. The new book was about a boy who found out he was a wizard and was sent off to wizard school. When I came back from Portugal, half a suitcase was full of papers covered with stories about Harry Potter. I came to live in Edinburgh with my very small daughter and set myself a deadline. I would finish the Harry novel before starting work as a French teacher and try to get it published. It was a year after finishing the book before a publisher bought it. The moment when I found out that Harry would be published was one of the best of my life. By this time, I was working as a French teacher and being serenaded down the corridors with the first line of the theme from Rawhide, "Rollin', rollin', rollin', keep those wagons rollin'."
Oh, jeez.
A few months after Harry was taken for publication in Britain, an American publisher bought the rights for enough money to enable me to give up teaching and write full-time, my life's ambition. And I've got a real rabbit now. She is large and black and scratches me ferociously every time I try and pick her up. Some things are best left in the imagination.
This is true. But wow, that's really... everybody can appreciate everything that's going on there, especially the way kids tease you about stuff. She was teased about her last name, Rowling. And I just realized I was pronouncing it Rowling and it's Rowling. So I got to start changing it to Rowling because that's what her name is pronounced. But, I mean, who can't identify with having been teased about something when you were a kid, right?
Oh, my goodness. When I was in the kindergarten through fourth grade, I was so happy in school. I loved school. I loved my classmates. I just thought school was a wonderful place. I loved working on projects. I just loved it. And my family moved for a year across the country to Indiana, which was a completely different place for me. The weather was different. The people were different. Everything was different. It was a huge culture shock to begin with. But I hated it so much. The kids were so cruel and mean. They called me Little Miss California and they sneered at me and I made like one friend while I was there.
Wow.
And one of the teachers was really nice to me. And I remember that my mom said that, I told her that this teacher was nice to me because some of the teachers were not nice to me at all. I had a teacher walk into the room and say, Little Miss California, I've heard that your desk is a mess. And she picked my desk up by the legs and just dumped everything out of it and said, why don't you put it right now? And of course the kids thought it was hysterical, fifth grade. And the principal actually said to my mother, you need to take her back to California because she's never going to. Yeah. I was a straight A student in California and at a college prep type of, it was grade school, but private school. And so it wasn't that I didn't do well in school. I was a straight A student and suddenly I was failing. And the principal said, your daughter's never going to thrive here in this environment. You need to take her back. And my mom moved back. Well,
he was right about that first part. Because I don't know anyone who would thrive in a place like that other than a bully or a mean-spirited person.
It seemed like I was surrounded by bullies. So whenever, and even when I hear myself tell the story, I think, was it really that? Yeah, it really was. I mean, in my memory, that's how bad it was. And it was a big school and I had come from a small school. And I remember being really nervous about sense of direction, like not knowing where I was going, following in the line to get to wherever we were going. And it seemed like this huge building. And it's funny because when I read stories now like this and I read about kids being bullied or, made fun of, I totally get it. It's like it takes me right back there. I'm like, oh yeah, it's not fun.
No.
And kids can be really cruel.
They can. Yeah.
So yeah.
Interesting thing about kids being being cruel, though, it took me a long time, well into adulthood, before I finally understood why kids were cruel. Because kids are cruel because they're treated cruelly.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
not something that is always directly evident, but it's one of those things that shows up indirectly. And it usually ties back to things like, oh, an alcoholic parent or an abusive parent, or a teacher who's got something bad going on in his or her life, so they take it out on the students or something like that. And you get enough of that going on. And I remember my overall experience of school. And I never moved away. We were always in the same city, small city in upstate New York, Schenectady. When I went to school there, the same feeling predominated through elementary school, junior high school, and high school. And I never had a word for it at the time, and I still don't really have a word for it, but I have a description for it now. And that word is, or that description is, keep yourself to yourself. It was dangerous to be out there. It was dangerous to be in some way different from the others, because that's a common thing, right? You want to fit in,
Right.
and in this environment, it was actually dangerous at times. Not always. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we were in some sort of a depressing hellhole that was just, you open your mouth and you got your mouth punched or something. It wasn't like that. But anytime that you took a step to in any way differentiate yourself, you were just reamed for it. You were just, given a really hard time for it. And I saw so many people get treated that way, and I certainly never wanted to get treated that way. So that's one of the reasons I became so introverted, because I just, I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It was
Just
very
keep to
cliquish.
yourself.
Yeah. It was a very cliquish
Yeah.
environment, lots of cliques, and the cliques were very self-protective for obvious reasons, because you didn't dare put your head out because somebody was going to chew it off. I remember there was one group of kids who lived just across the street from the elementary school that I attended. And in elementary school, they started picking on me, calling me Gumby. Remember Gumby, the cartoon character?
Yes.
And
I love Gumby.
well, I didn't love Gumby, I can tell you that.
And you didn't love being called Gumby. I don't think I'd want to be called
Exactly,
Gumby.
yeah. And it was always, hey, Gumby, where's Pokey? And stuff like that. And I
Oh
did my
my
best to
goodness.
ignore it, but I also realized later on the kids who were doing that, I knew almost all of them. I'd even visited their houses and so forth. And I didn't know their parents, but you could infer things about their parents just because of stuff that happened. And it became really evident to me that this group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids who all lived like within a couple blocks of each other, they were all about tearing each other down constantly. And you don't do
Wow.
that as a kid unless you have an influence that's suggesting that you do that. Well, I'm pretty sure I can think of at least one, maybe two parents who probably were in that category of just, being people who constantly tore people down. So they became the role models.
You
And
know,
it's just, it was sad, and it was frustrating, and it was scary all at the same time when you were a kid.
sure. And you're young and small and vulnerable and, want to fit in because we want to be doing the right things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We don't want to be in trouble. Because when we look at ourselves and the way we come into the world, we're trying to fit in from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, before at the point where we can only see the distance to our mother's face,
Mm-hmm.
we already can recognize a face that's pleased with us and a face that isn't.
Right.
So from the time we're born, practically, we're already trying to make sure that we are doing the right things, that we please people around us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that particular brain function is especially acute in females. And so what's interesting to me is as you were talking about your experience and I told my story of experiences, kind of similar experience of wanting to just walk in that straight line and not go in anyone else's lane because I don't want anyone else to, give me trouble.
Right.
I started thinking about, well, how does this connect to two things, to to money and the law of attraction, right? Well, I think about the idea that feeling like the more money we have, and when we get into the area of money that we're talking about with J.K. Rowling, we're talking about a ton of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the wealthiest women. And so what increases? Visibility.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, I imagine it gets harder and harder to keep yourself to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you do, people are going on their podcast and talking about your life, right?
Hopefully we're doing nicely, but there are others who probably don't do it so nicely.
So, exactly. And so it makes sense that there would be some of that desire to hold back and keep in our own lane and keep ourselves to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, if the more money we get, maybe the more visible we'll be and the more of this kind of stuff we have to deal with. It's one of the things that gets brought up when we dig in and see, and not just money, but success. Fear of success is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this visibility is one of the big reasons why.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And one of the quotes that I loved when I was looking at some of the quotes from J.K. Rowling was, she said, "I've never been remotely ashamed of having been depressed. Never. What's to be ashamed of? I went through a really rough time, and I'm quite proud that I got out of that."
Yeah.
And then another quote, she says, "Is fat," I guess she's been called fat. I don't know what the context is. She said, "Is fat really the worst thing a human being can be? Is fat worse than vindictive, jealous, shallow, vain, boring, or cruel? Not to me."
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so you see, I mean, reading these two quotes tell me that she's got some stuff thrown at her.
Yeah.
She's been called fat. She's been made fun of because she's had suffered depression. And she's coming back with, "I've never been remotely ashamed of having been depressed. Never. What's to be ashamed of?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, wow. So I think it really does tie into what we're talking about.
I think one of the most fascinating things that happened with her in terms of how she responded to it by not responding, I was really impressed by how she did not respond to it, was when it came out that Albus Dumbledore, the head of the school in the Harry Potter series, was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And when that came out, the firestorm that came after her was vicious. And she just stood her ground saying, "Yes, he's gay," and just left it at that. She didn't fight back. She didn't resist. She just, I'm sure it was getting through, but publicly she ignored it. She just refused to give any energy to all the naysayers who were tearing her down for the fact that their hero professor, their hero schoolmaster, was gay.
Well, she is quite vocal in standing up for marginalized populations.
She is, yes.
And it's one of the things that, of course, I think not just me, but a lot of people love about her.
Mm-hmm.
She's all over the news this morning. I won't get into that, but
oh, is she? I didn't even notice that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's again for her standing up for someone else, and it was good to see.
Uh-huh.
She's not afraid to stand her ground about things.
I think it's one of the things that comes from the background she had. I mean, she was impoverished. She was in many ways hopeless. She was depressed. And like she said, she got out of it. She climbed her way out. In fact, it raises a question, I'm sure, in many people's minds. Well, if she's been able to attract what she really wanted, why can't I? And of course, the answer is anybody can. But nevertheless, that's kind of a shallow answer. The deeper answer is, I think, tied to something that Abraham has mentioned a few times, which is that intense desire overcomes resistance. And she had an intense desire to be an author. I mean, that's very clear from her little story.
It took 5 years. Here's a paragraph I pulled out of one of the articles about her. It took Rowling 5 long and trying years of writing and a parade of rejections from a dozen different publishers. So, I mean, getting rejected by publishers, some people quit. She didn't.
She didn't.
I mean, I think that's, like we said before, she was able to focus all of her energy towards that one thing. I think that's a key there.
It is, because like you said, she did persevere. And the way that she persevered was just by loving writing so much that she was going to write and submit anyway, even if she was getting rejected. That's how much she loves it.
And she knew, I think, I mean, she says it, right? She knew it was the one arena that she felt she belonged in.
Right. And it's very evident from her story, from her not especially fascinating life so far story.
Yeah.
How, I mean, all through her time growing up in school and afterward, she was writing, she was telling stories, she was making things up for her friends. She was just a constant storyteller.
So this particular article was out, published a year ago, a little over a year ago. And it says, published by Bloomsbury in June 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone exploded almost instantly into a global sensation. 7 sequels later, the Harry Potter series has broken record after record, selling 450 million copies in 78 languages worldwide, spawning 8 blockbuster film adaptations and inspiring a generation of young readers from around the world. Rowling went from being on welfare to being a multimillionaire in 5 years, and perhaps most inspiring of all has been what she's done with her newfound wealth. Rowling never forgot where she came from and has donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charities as a result. It goes on to list some of the organizations. But I think this is interesting, 450 million copies, and this was over a year ago, so we can probably say a 500 million at this point.
Yeah, well, it's probably safe, yeah. But just thinking in terms of anything over 100 million is huge. 450, oh my God. That's crazy. That's just insane.
It's wonderful.
It is.
It's really wonderful. So here is a woman that persevered through adversity and made it. My guess is that she's far more successful than she ever imagined she would be.
Oh, yes. I mean, I remember seeing a TV interview in which she stated that baldly. Just never, even in her wildest dreams, expected anything close to what happened.
Amazing.
In fact, there was a really cool interview that my wife recorded where she and Daniel Radcliffe, who of course played Harry Potter, interviewed each other.
Oh, that's cool.
It was fun. It was fun because one would question the other and the other would question the one and so on, and they just go back and forth like that. Of course, they know each other really well because obviously she spent a lot of time on the sets of the movies while they were being made and, being like a guiding artistic force and so forth. And so Daniel got to know her really, really well and vice versa. But you got a sense of their relationship in their interview questions and the fact that they were enjoying doing this unusual interview process where, it's not like the typical interviews that they've gone through 1,000 times each. It was more like, this is a fun interview with somebody I know, and I get to ask you whatever I want to.
That is fun.
So more humanity coming out, right? More people as real people rather than as, the big millionaire. That, I think, is the main theme. That's the theme that the Rowling story gives to all of us, which is the fears that we have about making it and about what's going to happen and what's the downside of wealth and all that kind of stuff. Those fears melt away when you see real life people behaving like real human beings who are well off. Daniel Radcliffe's very well off too. He's a multimillionaire just because he played the role. So he actually falls in that category too. And yet they're both very grounded, very real people.
Here's a quote from her about money. She says, "Whatever money you might have, self-worth really lies in finding out what you do best."
I would even add to that, not just finding out what you do best, finding out what you love best. Because she clearly loves writing.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, about the idea that just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's something you love to do.
Right,
exactly. So I'm going to agree with you there. find out what you love to do best. And
And she didn't have to look very far. For her, it was relatively easy because she knew what she loved to do from day one, and she did it all the time she was growing up. She didn't have any
did she talk
paycheck,
about
but
how old she was when she wrote that first story?
5 or 6.
She said she was 5 or 6.
5 or 6, yeah.
About a rabbit that got the measles.
Called Rabbit.
He
Which
got
is
the measles and was visited by his friends, including a giant bee called Miss Bee.
I love the fact that a writer who is known for her creative names that she came up with for her characters called her first character a rabbit. She called that rabbit Rabbit. I mean, wait a minute.
Well, at some point, she starts. The first sentence of that little biography says, "I was born in Chipping Sawbury General Hospital," which I think is appropriate for someone who collects funny names.
Right? Yeah.
So, like you said, she named the rabbit in her story Rabbit and the bee Miss Bee.
Right.
Maybe at some point she decided I need to start collecting better names.
I think so. Yeah. Well, that's part of the growth process. Whenever we're developing a skill, we go through a growth process.
Yeah.
And she wasn't thinking of it as developing a skill. She was just thinking of it in terms of, I want to keep telling stories. But in the process of continuing to tell the stories, she learned stuff. I mean, one of the things that she's been given a lot of credit for is how she was able to tie a lot of mythology, ancient Greek mythology, into the Harry Potter series. Most of the spells were the names of the spells were derived from ancient Greek, which is pretty cool. Greek and Latin, actually. I guess there was both influences there. But she as time went on, she became better read, more knowledgeable, explored a lot of stuff, and tied all of it back to her writing, because her writing was her thing. That was the one thing she loved to do most of all.
So she did something that she loved. She stuck with it. She persevered. I know she talks often about structure, about discipline. And we know that she was disciplined because she said at some point she decided she would have to pour all of her energy into this one thing.
Right.
All of this, to me, can be related to what we do with not just that thing we find that we love to do, but really the way we use our thought processes as conscious creators.
That's true. Yeah, because that's the example that she said, isn't it? I mean, she focused directly on what was most important to her. She didn't focus on what she didn't have. I mean, not that she didn't ever do that. I'm sure she did. But she also focused on what was important to her, what she did have, what did work for her. And that is how she really turned the corner.
She says, you've got to work. It's about structure. It's about discipline. It's all these deadly things that your school teacher told you needed. Yes. You need it. And so I see that, that she worked really hard and was very disciplined about getting it done. I mean, she said she came back from a trip with half a suitcase full of writing.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that she was definitely pouring all her energy into. And what I see so much with law of attraction, people that find out about that they actually can have a hand in creating their reality, is that sometimes they don't have the discipline, or at least they don't have the discipline at first, to really put all that energy there. It's more like wishing. They wish for something and then don't really think about it again, and then wonder why it's not happening when they've been pointing their focus in lots of different areas and not really learning. It takes discipline to learn and practice to really be able to laser focus on what you want to get done. And she had that ability.
I think
she disciplined herself to do it.
I think it also comes back to what we talked about before about loving it. Because in my case anyway, finding what I loved was the hardest thing I had to do in my life. Because I didn't know what I loved.
Yeah.
I knew what I was good at, but I didn't know what I loved. And if you don't know what you love, that's the number one job, finding that. Because once you find that, that's where the energy comes from.
And, I want to point out, too, that she wrote her first story when she was 5. And then, and so we know for her that thing she loved to do was a continuous thread all the way through her life, and it's still happening today, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the case for everybody.
Nope.
Sometimes the things we love change.
Yep.
And also sometimes we don't find that thing until much later in life.
My hand is in the air.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important to recognize.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember an article or something that I read. I'm going to try to find it. It'll be really good for this series that we're doing, because it actually was a whole group, a list of people that were very, well, I want to say famous, but I should say well known for whatever it is they did, right? It's like when you list J.K. Rowling, it's like she's famous because she's so well known for this amazing body of work she created. And these people were all in that category. We would recognize their names. But many of them didn't start doing that thing that they're known for until they were 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, and it was like, wow. And so for people that are no longer, 20, it's really encouraging to know that it just doesn't have an expiration date.
Right.
It's like, as long as you're alive, you can still discover new things that you love to do and love to learn about and are passionate about.
Absolutely true. In fact,
to me, that's really important.
I think I don't remember who said it, but whoever said it was right when they said, "You woke up today. Congratulations. Your life continues. You get another chance."
Right. Every day's a new day.
Every day's a new day.
Yeah. So I think for me, that was really important. And I've actually begun doing something over the past couple of decades, but even more so right now. And that is asking myself, excuse me, what do I want to be really good at over the next decade? Because I love that.
In my case, it isn't even, well, I certainly want to be good at it, but in my case, it's what do I want to do? What do I really love that I would want to do? That's an even more primal question as far as I'm concerned, because it took me so long to answer it. I guess that's why it means so much to me. But
no, I love it. I love it. I think it's connected, because for me, I asked that question too. What do I want to do over the next decade? Yeah. And then there's going to be some learning involved, and some discovery, and some research, and some. And like you've taught me about the Sudbury School method.
Yeah.
I may say, what do I want to do? And launch out about it all excited and find out, oh, that's not really for me. And that's okay.
Yes.
At that point, I ask myself the question again.
That's right.
And I discover something else.
You just keep trying things. Because you try enough things, eventually you're going to find something that just resonates. Right.
And when you love to do it, it definitely is a lot easier to point your energy there.
And one of the things you've loved to do, you've really incorporated into your life, is you're a life coach. So I also want to take a few moments about that. You're a really good life coach. I mean, I know that just from talking with you every week. For somebody who wants to reach out and maybe get a little help with finding what the thing is they love in their life, or how to take their next step, or how to, piece together this thing that they're wanting to piece together, how do they reach out to you?
And I would love it if they did. As a matter of fact, I have had people reaching out to me lately, and I think we're going to do some of that today, finding out what it is that turns someone on. So you can reach out to me at my website, cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. Send me a hello. Yeah. Send me a shout out.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't even have to be if you're looking to, hire a life coach. Just say hello. But I'd love to coach you as well. So
really good. Excellent.
Reach out.
Well, I can't wait to find out who we're going to be focusing on tomorrow, but I'm loving this looking at the wealthy and finding out what they are as people thing.
I love it too. It's great.
So let's do it again. We hope that you'll join us next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.